Hey everyone. Before we jump into today's deep dive, quick reminder to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you don't miss any of our future episodes. Okay, so let's dive into the world of semiconductors. We're going to unpack this report on AMD and really try to figure out, if it's a smart investment.
Yeah, it's definitely a company worth looking at, especially with how much AI and data centers are growing. This deep dive should give you a good idea of whether or not you want to invest in AMD.
Okay, so the report jumps right in talking about what AMD actually does. I know they make computer chips, but like what kind? And what are they used for?
Right, so they're really big in CPUs and APUs. Those are basically the brains of lots of devices we use every day, laptops, the servers running those data centers we were talking about.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So how does AMD compare to the competition?
Well, the report talks about AMD's moat, like their competitive advantage. They're known for making high-performance processors that are often cheaper than the competition, like Intel.
So they offer more for your money. That's a pretty good
Uh,
strategy.
Exactly. And it's not just about the technology. They've also made smart partnerships with big names like Microsoft and Dell, and they have a great reputation with gamers.
Oh yeah, gamers a powerful force.
Yeah.
But let's get down to business here. How are AMD's financials looking?
Their December 2023 report shows a debt-to-equity ratio of 0.34, which is pretty healthy.
So their debt isn't out of control. What about their revenue?
They've had consistent growth there, too.
Okay, that's good. But what about their stock specifically?
Well, as of today, their stock is at 125.37.
Interesting. What are analysts predicting about the future of the stock?
They're predicting an average price target of 184.52.
Wow, so that's a potential upside of 47%. Things are getting interesting. So we know AMD is a major player in a growing industry. They seem to have solid financials. But what about their overall strategy?
The report actually looks at AMD through Warren Buffett's investment principles, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, wow. Using the Oracle of Omaha as a benchmark.
Yeah.
Okay, I like it. So how does AMD measure up?
They actually line up with a lot of Buffett's main principles. They're in an industry with strong long-term prospects. The need for semiconductors isn't going away anytime soon.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Their business model is pretty easy to understand, which is another plus for Buffett. And like we talked about, they have strong financials and a capable management team.
Okay, so they're checking a lot of Buffett's boxes. But are there any areas where they fall short?
One possible issue is what's called the margin of safety. Basically, buying a stock when it's priced much lower than its actual value to leave room for error.
So are they saying AMD's stock might be a little overpriced right now?
Well, given the high growth expectations and competition, it doesn't seem like it's trading at a big discount. So that's something to think about.
Good point. Seems like we have a lot to consider. On one hand, AMD has a lot going for it. Strong position in a growing market, good financials, and even a mostly thumbs up from Warren Buffett. But then there's the question of their valuation.
Exactly. And that's what makes things really interesting. To fully understand AMD's potential, we need to look deeper into the specific challenges and opportunities they face.
Okay, this has already given us a lot to think about. But before we go any further, let's take a quick pause. When we come back, we'll dig into those challenges and opportunities and see if we can get an even better picture of AMD's potential as an investment. Don't go anywhere.
Okay, so you mentioned challenges and opportunities. Let's start by talking about the challenges AMD faces in the semiconductor market.
Okay, what are we looking at?
Well, one of the biggest is how cyclical the industry is. It's known for these periods of boom and bust driven by stuff like the global economy and new technology.
So even though the demand for semiconductors is going up, overall, there could be times when sales go down, and that could affect AMD.
Exactly. And then there's the competition. The semiconductor industry is super competitive with all these companies fighting for market share.
We talked about Intel before. Are there other big companies that AMD should be worried about?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Companies like NVIDIA and Qualcomm are big players, too, each with their own advantages and strategies. AMD needs to keep innovating to stay ahead of the game.
Right. That makes sense. It sounds like keeping up with technology is really important for AMD. What else should we be thinking about?
Another challenge is managing the supply chain. Making semiconductors is incredibly complex. It involves like a whole global network of suppliers and manufacturers.
Yeah, we've all seen how supply chain problems can really mess things up for businesses, especially these days.
Exactly. AMD isn't immune to those disruptions. They need to make sure they have reliable access to materials and manufacturing capacity to meet the demand for their products.
Okay, so we've talked about the cyclical nature of the industry,
Hmm.
the competition, and the supply chain challenges. What about the opportunities? I imagine there are some exciting prospects for a company like AMD.
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest opportunities for AMD right now is the rise of AI. The demand for powerful processors that can handle complex AI tasks is just exploding, and AMD is in a great spot to take advantage of that.
We talked earlier about how AMD is strong in data centers.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's connected to this AI opportunity.
Absolutely. Data centers are like the foundation for AI development. AMD's EPYC server processors have been doing really well in the data center market, taking market share away from Intel.
Okay, so they're already in a fast-growing market. That's great.
Another huge opportunity for AMD is gaming.
Oh, yeah, gamers. I remember reading that AMD's Ryzen processors are really popular with PC gamers.
Definitely. They've been giving Intel a run for their money in the gaming CPU market, offering similar performance at often better prices.
So they're using their price to performance advantage in a market with a lot of passionate customers.
Smart. What else is coming up for AMD?
The car industry is another interesting area for AMD. As cars are getting more high-tech, the demand for processors is increasing like crazy.
You mean stuff like self-driving features and all the electronics in modern cars?
Exactly. AMD is already working with companies like Tesla to provide processors for their infotainment systems. Okay, so we've got AI gaming and the car industry, all areas where AMD could grow a lot. Sounds like they have a lot going on.
They do. But it's important to remember that opportunities always have risks, too.
What kind of risks?
Well, for one thing, these markets change so quickly. Something that's hot today could be outdated tomorrow. AMD needs to stay ahead of the game when it comes to technology.
I guess that's true for any tech company.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's the risk of execution. It's one thing to see an opportunity, but it's another to actually make the most of it. AMD needs to execute its strategy perfectly, bring new products to market, build strong relationships, and manage everything well.
It's a lot to do.
It is. But based on how they've been doing and the moves they've been making, AMD seems ready for the challenge. They're good at innovating, and they've shown they're willing to adapt to changing markets.
So a lot of potential, but also a lot of work to do. It sounds like AMD is really moving and shaking, constantly innovating to stay ahead.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. AMD is definitely a company to watch.
We've covered a lot of ground here. AMD's business, their finances, their competitors, and the challenges and opportunities they face.
We have a pretty complete view of AMD as an investment now, looking at both the good and the bad.
We do. But before we finish up, I think it's important to step back and look at the big picture. What does AMD's story tell us about the semiconductor industry as a whole?
That's a great question, and it's one we can talk about more after a short break. Stay with us.
All right, we're back. So before we wrap up, I want to hear your thoughts on what AMD's journey tells us about the semiconductor industry as a whole.
Well, I think AMD shows just how dynamic this industry is. It's all about constant innovation, fierce competition, and new technology coming out all the time.
Yeah, we saw how they've had to adapt and evolve to keep up, especially going against a giant like Intel.
Exactly. AMD's success shows that even in a well-established industry like semiconductors, there's always room for someone to shake things up and grow. They've managed to gain a lot of market share by focusing on innovation strategic partnerships and putting the customer first.
It's also interesting how AMD's future seems tied to these big trends we're seeing in tech, like AI data centers and the growing need for computing power in everything, like cars and gaming consoles.
For sure. AMD is like a little example of the bigger things happening in technology. Their success or failure will really depend on how well they can handle these trends and use the new opportunities that come up.
So for our listeners thinking about investing in AMD, what's the key takeaway?
I think the main thing is to remember that AMD is in a high-growth, high-risk environment. They have a lot of potential, but there are also some big challenges and things we can't predict, for sure.
So it's not a guaranteed win. Investors really need to do their research.
Exactly. Investors need to balance the potential rewards with the risks. And that means really digging into their financials, understanding their competitors, and carefully looking at their strategy for the future.
We've learned a lot in this deep dive. We talked about AMD's business model, their finances, their competition, the challenges and opportunities they face, and even how their story reflects the bigger trends in the semiconductor industry.
Yeah, it's been a really thorough look at AMD, and it's a good starting point for anyone who wants to learn more about the company and whether it's a good investment.
Well said. And to our listeners, we encourage you to keep learning about AMD, get different perspectives, and make your own decision based on your own investment goals and how much risk you're comfortable with.
And remember, investing always has risks. Don't invest more than you can afford to lose, And make sure you diversify your portfolio.
Very wise words. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into AMD.